Hi, this is Jim from Tech World, and today we're looking into Where No Man Has Gone Before, the second pilot. We're going to spot real-time goofs, unpack production verse, and map unaired cut differences along the way. As an added bonus, do not miss the behind-the-scenes visual effects, as well as an exclusive video library of all the shots made of the 11-foot model for this episode.
The following program is brought to you in living color by Trek World.
So we're going to begin this video with the introduction that William Shatner recorded for this episode in the 1998 to 1999 Sci-Fi Channel special edition of Star Trek. These interviews, which we intermixed throughout our presentation, have not been rebroadcast since their original air date, nor have they ever been available on home video.
Where No Man Has Gone Before is a Star Trek episode designed to make the TV network executives happy. It's got action, character, and high drama, and indeed, it was designed for just that purpose. NBC turned Gene Roddenberry down when he showed them The Cage, the pilot he produced for a new weekly science fiction series titled Star Trek. They said it was too cerebral. But in an unprecedented move, the network requested a second pilot, even though they'd spent the unheard-of sum of over $600,000 for the first. Changes were made to the cast. Jeffrey Hunter had originally sat in the command chair, but it was decided a new captain was needed. Lloyd Bridges turned down the role. Jack Lord of Hawaii Five-0 fame was interested, but a deal couldn't be worked out. I had made a fair name for myself in a few movies and Broadway productions, been in a Twilight Zone and an Outer Limits, so they probably figured I'd had enough experience on other worlds to steer a starship. Coincidentally, I'd also worked with Leonard Nimoy in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Where No Man Has Gone Before convinced NBC to send the Star Trek crew on its 5-year mission to boldly go where no TV series has gone before. So here it is, what is considered to be episode number 1 of Star Trek, and my very first appearance as Captain James T. Kirk.
Okay, now, as many people probably know, Where No Man Has Gone Before is actually the second pilot for the original Star Trek television series. It was not produced originally as an episode. It was a pilot. Now, as a result, there are some pretty substantial changes throughout this entire episode. And we're going to take a look at some of the things that were actually removed from this episode. And first and foremost, in place of Kirk's famous Space the Final Frontier line, there was a completely different intro. Take a look at this.
Enterprise log, Captain James Kirk commanding. We are leaving that vast cloud of stars and planets which we call our galaxy. Behind us, Earth, Mars, Venus, even our sun are specks of dust. A question. What is out there in the black void beyond? Until now, our mission has been that of space law regulation, contact with Earth colonies, and investigation of alien life. But now, a new task. A probe out into where no man has gone before.
Now, another thing that differed in the original pilot versus the television series was that every time the viewer would come back from a commercial, it would display a title card like this one for Act 1. Now, when the Sci-Fi Channel aired Where No Man Has Gone Before for the second time in 1999, the hosting duties were taken over by Leonard Nimoy from William Shatner, who had done the first year. What we're looking at right now is the very first Act 1 intro in that airing.
After NBC rejected the first Star Trek pilot, The Cage, they took the unprecedented step of giving Gene Roddenberry a second chance. Although closer to the final form, this second pilot still looks much different from the rest of the series. William Shatner is the new captain of the Enterprise. Spock is coldly logical. Noticeably absent is DeForest Kelley as Dr. McCoy. Jimmy Doohan and George Takei are present, but Nichelle Nichols would not come on board as Lieutenant Uhura until the next episode. Walter Koenig would not join the cast until the beginning of the second season. However, the one element that was there from the beginning was the human drama that was the hallmark of any Star Trek episode. This is a story about friendship, loyalty, and the dangers of power. It's a story that would be the first step on a journey that has lasted over 30 years and has truly taken us where no man has gone before.
Now, this next sequence, which takes us from the actual transporter room to the bridge, was also removed from the episode version of Where No Man Has Gone Before. So let's walk along with them, shall we?
Bridge to all decks. Condition alert. Bridge to all decks. Condition alert.
The original unaired second pilot was shown at WorldCom on September 3rd, 1966. It would not be seen again by the general public until 2009. You see, it had been believed lost for many, many years, but then it was found in a German fan's private collection.
All decks. Condition alert.
Stardate 1312.4, the Enterprise noses towards the galactic barrier, and you can now feel the show inventing itself in real time. New captain, new look, and new rules. Now, I do want to call attention to the fact that once they make it to the turbo lift, take a look at the floor. We get a very unique top-down shot, which we don't see very often in Star Trek. And one of the reasons they didn't use it was because it exposed flaws in the way the set was built. And in this case, it exposed the fact that it's a continuous piece of carpet and continuous flooring from the hallway into the floor of the turbo lift. Now, we see a number of new faces in this episode. William Shatner obviously debuts as Captain Kirk. We have actor Paul Thicke playing Dr. Piper. Sulu is shown to be an astroscientist, and Scotty does show up from engineering. So now we're going to take a look at the very first blooper to appear in this episode. Watch the screen carefully, and right at the end of this scene, I'm going to stop it. Take a look in the bottom right-hand corner. You can clearly see rigging that is actually on the floor and expected to be out of camera shot.
Tapes are burned out, trying the memory banks.
Now, this very next set is also a little bit on the unique side. Spock actually complains right up front, hey, this thing's tapes are completely burned out, so I'll see what I can find out from the memory banks. But just a few moments later, he refers to the difficulty of getting the information off the tapes that were burned. Apparently, they weren't completely burned out after all.
I'm not getting it all. The tapes are pretty badly burned.
Shooting on this pilot began on July 19, 1965. Post-wrapped in January of 1966, and NBC approved the series in February of 1966, 1 year after rejecting The Cage. Now, what's really interesting is that Oscar winner Ernest Haller from Gone with the Wind served as the show's cinematographer for this episode. And of course, coming back from commercial break, this particular title card had been removed from the TV series, but was in fact in the pilot. Now we'll go and take a look at the Act 2 intro by Leonard Nimoy from his airing.
Gene Roddenberry's previous series, The Lieutenant, proved to be a fertile ground of talent when it came time to cast Star Trek. Nichelle Nichols appeared in episodes of The Lieutenant, and it's where I first met Gene as well. Now, the star of The Lieutenant, however, was Gary Lockwood, whom Gene picked to play Gary Mitchell in Where No Man Has Gone Before. Gary would later go on to appear as the ill-fated astronaut Frank Poole in another sci-fi classic, 2001, A Space Odyssey.
And while we're at it, we'll come back from another commercial break and watch the Act 3 title card. Now, the next package we're going to take a look at goes back one more time to the Sci-Fi Channel Special Edition.
This is the captain speaking. The object we encountered is a ship's disaster recorder, apparently ejected from the SS Valiant almost 200 years ago.
Tapes are burned out, trying the memory banks.
We hope to learn from the recorder what the Valiant was doing here and what destroyed the vessel. We'll move out into our probe as soon as we have those answers.
Well, I feel a kind of a responsibility to the show and to the Star Trek history. I think this particular project that we're doing now is a major historical event, in my opinion. It's a sort of a fresh look, a fresh revisiting of the show in a way that it hasn't been seen in many years.
Autopsy report, sir. Each case showed damage to the body's neural circuit. An area of the brain was burned out.
Are you feeling all right?
Yes, Mitchell too, except for his eyes. We're trying to find a reason for that now, and why out of our whole crew only certain people were affected.
New prints, footage restored, commentary. I think it's an important event, and I decided that I'd like to be part of it. I think that probably that's the reason that all of us from the original show are doing this, because it's meaningful.
Ah, yes. One of your Earth emotions.
It's almost a memorialization of the show in its finest form.
Dr. Dana feels he isn't that dangerous. What makes you right and a trained psychiatrist wrong?
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic. In my opinion, we'll be lucky if we can repair this ship and get away in time.
And I think for a lot of people who've been hearing about Star Trek for many years and never paid much attention, I think it'll be an eye-opener.
And what I have here is a series of treats for you. This is footage, raw visual effects footage that was shot for the making of Where No Man Has Gone Before. In most cases, this footage could not be used because if you really examine it, you'll see there's shadows on the ship at different places and things that just simply would not have worked. But we were very, very lucky that Paramount actually maintained this footage. Years later, it would be released in the Roddenberry vaults. Now, in this next clip, we basically see an approach angle taken of the ship as it approaches the camera's viewpoint. This is a variation of the same theme, but in this case, the ship's coming straight at us. And here we have a rear-angled departure. Notice the grillwork holes at the end of the nacelles. They were only present for Where No Man Has Gone Before. In the original pilot, The Cage, the back of the nacelles were solid. And then, of course, in the TV series, we were given the little white balls that stuck on each end. Here's yet another approach angle. And this particular shot would go on to become one of the most famous scenes ever used in Star Trek, and that, of course, is the ship passing from the left-hand side to the right-hand side of the screen. In another experimental approach, we have this particular shot, which, in all honesty, is one of my favorite shots ever. It's really a shame that they were unable to use it exactly the way it is. Now, Samuel A. Peebles wrote the teleplay for Where No Man Has Gone Before. Roddenberry revised it. Of course he would. But the core godlike friend premise in the title actually belonged to Samuel. Now, in this next blooper we're going to take a look at, the question is concerning the height of two particular crew members. First and foremost, it's established in these shots that Gary Mitchell is 5'9", and Elizabeth Denner is 5'2". That's a 7-inch height difference between Gary Mitchell and Denner. But take a look at this shot from later in the episode where Denner and Mitchell enter into his cell and stand in front of a mirror, revealing that they're approximately the exact same height. Now, another thing concerning Gary Mitchell is Spock's concern about how quickly Gary is absorbing the written word as it flashes by the screen. But what no one seems to notice throughout this entire take is it's the same 3 pages over and over and over again. Now, this next interview is actually pretty special because you don't very often see interviews with a lot of the secondary and tertiary characters in Star Trek. But in this case, we're going to hear from actor Paul Carr, who played Lieutenant 𝐾𝐨𝐽.
The character I played was Lieutenant Lee 𝐾𝐨𝐽. And it was, as we say at all the conventions, the second pilot, the one that sold the show. I was a member of the crew, and the spaceship, the Enterprise, passes through a peculiar kind of force field that affects certain members of the crew. The 2 members that were affected, basically, were Gary Lockwood, who played Gary Mitchell, and Sally Kellerman. Things started to happen to him. His brain expanded at this enormous rate, and he was able to read volumes of books in one sitting. And then he was able to telekinetically move things, and he had enormous strength. Sally Kellerman played a doctor on the Enterprise who was very concerned about his health and about what was happening to him, and obviously she was beginning to fall in love with him. But she was also affected by this force field that we'd gone through, so she started to make certain changes too. I was the first person he killed because we were trying to keep him trapped on a small asteroid, and he, using his telekinetic powers and telekinesis and whatever, found out about it and strangled me with a cable. So if it hadn't been for Gary Lockwood, I'd probably still be on that series.
Now, most of the Enterprise sets that we're seeing here were actually built for the Cage, with the exception of Sick Bay, which was built for the first time here for the second pilot. Now, this one's kind of interesting in the fact that we can clearly see in the first clips here that Gary Mitchell has a t-shirt on under his crew uniform. This is clearly seen in Sick Bay, but not long afterwards in the transporter room, the t-shirt is gone, only to reappear again when he reaches the planet's surface. And another interesting occurrence from this same particular event is that even though he was unconscious, Gary Mitchell was able to stand unassisted on the transporter pad. The silver eyes used for Denner and for Mitchell were custom lenses made by LA optician John Roberts. Basically, they were tinfoil labeled between 2 lenses. Gary Lockwood discovered that he could only actually see through them by tilting his head. So he worked that into his character to assume a more godlike visage, having to look down upon you. Now, this clip, we see the Doctor waking up Kirk and Spock, but the one thing I want to call attention to is, as Kirk's asking about the crew, the Doctor immediately jumps to the conclusion that Dr. Denner went with Gary Mitchell, when in fact, he admits that it also knocked him out. So he really has no clue where Denner is. For all he knows, she could be dead in one of these rooms.
Dr. Denner, she went with Mitchell.
And we are now moving into Act 4, according to the title card. When Star Trek got its second chance in 1965, the Enterprise had to look spectacular. Over at the Howard A. Anderson Company, the freshly refitted 11-foot model, now glowing with internal lights, was filmed in a week of painstaking night sessions that started after 6 and ran until the lamps overheated each night. Cameras crept forward frame by frame while the ship stood still, creating a smooth, cinematic motion. Every shot favored the starboard side, which was the side that had the most detail. These beauty passes, quartering approaches, straight-on cruises, orbital inserts, they formed the visual backbone of Star Trek. One earlier bridge zoom from the Cage snuck into this episode as well, but everything else came from those September 65 sessions that defined how the Enterprise would forever sail the stars. What you're seeing here are every one of the visual effects shots that were shot that night specifically for Where No Man Has Gone Before. These are the original effects. They are not the CGI effects that were replaced years later, which I think is probably painfully obvious to you. And here we see our final interview with William Shatner from the Sci-Fi Channel Special Edition.
Where No Man Has Gone Before takes us on a journey to explore the price of immortality and the cost of ultimate power. It has a familiar theme going back to the Greek tragedies. What happens when man plays God? Kirk watches as a close friend is transformed into something more than a human and something less than a man. Power does corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Sally Kellerman being selected to play Dr. Denner happened really late in pre-production. NBC had insisted that recognizable faces be used for both Mitchell and Denner. Now we're going to take a look at another interview, this one with Sally Kellerman, who played Dr. Denner.
Gary Lockwood and I were like the Velos and Yolanda of television, and he and I were the guest star on this second pilot. So there we are, walking around the man-made lake, we're bumping into trees, slipping into the water, and no one is saying cut, and I'm getting starting to get just a small amount of the giggles. And now he reaches for the perforated peach, and he's going to rip it apart like this great god that he was, and hand me a piece while we had the scene, and it took him like, and they couldn't get it apart, and then rip, and still nobody's saying cut, you know. We had to wear lenses. We wore silver lenses in our eyes, and I had never worn glasses, and Gary hadn't, and he couldn't stand it for 1 second. You'd have him in for 1 second, and you'd get these lenses out of my eyes, you know, and this big screaming.
Stop it, Gary.
Morals are for men, not gods.
What do you know about gods? I feel that I'm responsible for Star Trek's success because I was the guest star on the pilot. Yeah, I'd never thought of that. Gee, maybe it really was me.
Now, in this particular scene, I have to call attention to the fact that it appears this crewman has fallen asleep at the communication station. Look behind Spock as he crosses over. In probably what is the most famous blooper ever committed in a Star Trek episode, we see James R. Kirk's tombstone. Even though we all know his middle name began with a T. And finally, we'll use Leonard Nimoy's closing section to bring us to an end of Act 4 and Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Can power rob us of our humanity? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's an old adage that will be featured in many Star Trek episodes. With this second pilot tucked safely under his arm, Gene Roddenberry got what he so dearly wanted from NBC. Firm commitment to at least one season of this strange new show called Star Trek. Although this was the pilot that sold the series, NBC chose not to debut Star Trek with this episode. As much as it differed from the original pilot, NBC still considered Where No Man Has Gone Before too cerebral. Clearly, the network executives were more comfortable with monster stories. So the honor of opening the season went to The Man Trap, which was the 6th episode we filmed. One way or another, it didn't matter. Star Trek was born.
Alexander Courage also scored this episode. You can hear the beginning of what would later become Star Trek's musical DNA. I guess it's only fitting as we approach the end of the deep dive here that we're going to take a look at the original credits that were in the pilot and how they differed from the credits that were actually at the end of the episode when it aired. Notice in these credits that we do have an identification that Mr. Sulu was in fact a physicist. Now, his secondary role, he was known to have an interest in the science of botany. So they obviously shifted from the astrosciences to botany between the pilot and the television series. And that is Where No Man Has Gone Before. A pilot that's half episode, half proof of concept, and all Trek DNA. On a Culver City soundstage, they made a galaxy. and a captain who must weigh friendship against duty.